Tonight on Real News from the Blaze, things in Syria have escalated once again. SC, it's gotten even uglier?
If you can imagine, yeah, more violence in Syria over the weekend, and everyone from Kofi Annan in the UN to the White House are still insisting that military intervention in Syria isn't necessary. So it seems everyone is sticking to their guns, but only Assad's are loaded.
All right, we'll have that debate and much more on Real News from the Blaze coming up in just 60 minutes.
This is not going to be about politics. This is about principles. We're going to take it upon ourselves to be part of the solution.
We are going to restore history, restore our honor, restore his idea that character is what matters.
Let us not lose this battle because we sat down.
This is the Glenn Beck Program.
Hello and welcome to GBTV. I'm Dana Lash in for Glenn. On Sunday night, just as his family was sitting down to dinner, Eric Erickson, my colleague at CNN and editor of RedState.com, was visited by sheriff's deputies. They showed up at his front door with their hands on their guns, just to ask him some questions. You see, somebody had spoofed Erickson's unlisted home phone number, called 911, gave his home address, and claimed that a shooting had taken place. Curiously enough, this happened just days after Erickson talked about Brett Kimberlin. He is the Indiana Speedway bomber, and he's been out of prison for 10 years now, and he's now targeting reportedly conservative bloggers. And the blog about Kimberlin Day just happened this past Friday, something Glenn highlighted on his radio program as well. Now, see, before Erickson, a Los Angeles blogger named Paterico was nearly shot by a SWAT team when they arrived at his home in the middle of the night. And they took his wife and kids from their beds, all because someone spoofing his home number called 911 and said, "I shot my wife." It took him 7 months to get that audio, by the way, of that call, which is incredibly creepy. Erickson believes that the reason the SWAT team did not descend upon his house and point barrels at him and his family is because, A, he has a friendly relationship with the sheriff's deputies who know him, and B, he had notified them that something like this may happen. Now, this is the third time this technique, known as swatting, has been used. Law enforcement calls this tactic an extreme form of harassment. And it's also against federal law, according to former Department of Justice lawyer and whistleblower J. Christian Adams, who says such tactics are a violation of a federal code, which reads, quote, "If two or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both." Now, Adams says that the Department of Justice could stop this in just 48 hours if they wanted. Really? The same Department of Justice that refused to prosecute the new Black Panther Party, the same Department of Justice refusing, they're too busy, so they're refusing Fast and Furious records requests from Darrell Issa and the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Leftists work to elect into office an administration who appoints people to specifically look the other way when injustices such as these occur. They're not going to lift a finger to come to the aid of conservative bloggers who perpetuate many of the stories about this administration that wind up as headlines. See, this is the level of desperation that we're seeing from the left. They resort to infringing upon the freedoms of their political opposition in their quest to keep hold of power. It's completely antithetical to who they say they are. And they're falling apart at the seams because the American people are truly starting to see it. And think about it. This progressive ideology has been infecting the Democrat Party for the past several generations, pushing both parties really farther and farther left. They've bided their time, very slowly taking over academia, over Hollywood, shaping and molding the minds of our most young and impressionable. into perfect little receptacles for their ideological garbage. Now, they won control of government in 2008 and only lost 1/2 of 1 out of 3 branches in 2010. The future of America hinges upon 2012, yes, but the future of their movement hinges upon 2012. See, they've toiled for a century to get to this point, and now they're on the verge of losing everything. They've played this last hand too fast, and they cranked up the heat on that proverbial frog in the pot of water too quickly. See, the frog noticed. America noticed. They weren't prepared for this, which is why you see an uninspired regurgitation of 60s anti-war rhetoric, women's rights rhetoric. I mean, really? Weren't these issues debated before I was even born? They're desperate, and they're throwing everything they have at this. They want to shut you up because, see, the more you talk and that means just the more they have to defend their actions. Now, all of this that I spoke about, the swattings, that's just one tactic the left uses to silence opposition. By now, you've heard that Wisconsin is having a recall election. It's not just any recall election, folks. This is one of the most important elections of 2012, second only to the presidential election. Debbie Wasserman Schultz said on Sunday morning that Wisconsin is the, quote, test run for November.
I think what's going to happen is that because of our on-the-ground operation, we've had an opportunity in this election, because especially given that Wisconsin's a battleground state, just like we did in the recall elections a year ago, to give this a test run. And so what I think the implications will be is that ultimately I think Tom Barrett will pull this out. But regardless, it's given the Obama for America operation an opportunity to do the dry run that we need of our massive, significant, dynamic grassroots presidential campaign.
Significant, dynamic grassroots campaign. That's why Obama and Romney are neck and neck in Wisconsin, and that's why Scott Walker's leading. See, Governor Scott Walker is the valedictorian of the first generation of reform governors who won majority vote in 2010, and along with his lieutenant governor, Rebecca Clayfish. They're both now being recalled in just days on June 5th, along with 4 state legislators, because they did the job that Wisconsin voters elected them to do, and they were successful. So why are they being recalled? Now, consider it another tactic from the left, the abuse of the recall function. Now, see, recall elections and the functions, this has a purpose, and abusing the function because you don't like the outcome of a legitimate election is not one of them. But yet that's what's happening in Wisconsin. Labor gathered 1 million signatures for their recall election, and interestingly enough, less than 650,000 voted in the Democrat recall primaries. Walker and Clayfish's reforms have set the state on path to a $154 million budget surplus. They saved the state nearly $1 billion, and they increased hiring and Wisconsin's business rankings, all without raising taxes or firing teachers. Just imagine these results replicated in all 50 states. Every single governor in this country is watching them right now, from Bobby Jindal down in Louisiana, who's facing a battle of his own, to Andrew Cuomo. Now, speaking of Governor Jindal, this morning came word that Louisiana Labor has launched their Recall Bobby Jindal campaign, and they're now holding petition signature drives across the state. If it can happen in Wisconsin, it can happen in your state, and it will happen in your state. Now, the Wisconsin recall is 1 week from today. I'll be there June 2nd, by the way, and special interest groups are doing everything they can to try and throw Wisconsin's governor and lieutenant governor out of office. GBTV's Ami Horowitz sat down with Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker for his documentary, Showdown Wisconsin, and asked him what's really at stake if he loses.
For the special interests coming in from Washington, they recognize they need to send a message. They need to not only beat me, they need to take me out and send a message to anyone in America that if you cross these special interests, they're coming for you next. If we fail to win this election, If we fail to win this battle, this will set aside any sort of courageous act in American politics at least a decade, if not a generation.
We will hear more from Amy Horowitz later in the program, but now I want to ask this same question to Wisconsin's Lieutenant Governor, Rebecca Kleefisch, who joins us right now via Skype. First of all, Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to have you. But
Thanks for having me, Tina.
Of course. I have to ask you, what is really at stake here on June 5th?
Oh, there's so much at stake. I can honestly say the future of my little girls, but also the future of your kids, the futures of children, the sons and daughters across this country, the children of America, because what you said sounded really ominous. And I'm sure there are people at home who are watching right now saying, oh gosh, she's just trying to spook us. She's trying to scare us, creep us out. But here are the facts. Bobby Jindal was up campaigning with us last week, and he said, listen, I have people from Wisconsin, organizers from Wisconsin, who have traveled down to Louisiana, and they're after me next. They're after Bobby Jindal next. Then they're after your governor and your governor and your governor, your mayor, your county supervisor, anyone who has political courage to stand up to a special interest group and say, I'm not going to be beholden to a special interest. I instead am going to represent we the people, we the parents, the taxpayers, the hardworking families of America.
That's it. That's exactly it. And that's what you've been doing for these past several years in Wisconsin. And we've seen these reforms work. I have to ask you, Lieutenant Governor, it seems odd to me that 7% of the workforce could stage a recall election simply because they didn't like the outcome of 2010. This really is no more than a do-over of 2010.
Right, but it's not 7% of our workforce staging this recall. Dana, you and I both know that this is big organized labor, the public sector union bosses, largely, who don't even live in Wisconsin. You know, my opponent is the head of the state firefighters union, and every big independent expenditure that comes out in support of him is coming directly from the big public sector union in Washington, D.C. And so we know that this is not a movement that has been generating momentum on behalf of 7% of our workforce. This is a movement directed by and funded by the big public sector unions outside of Wisconsin. And they are directing it, and they are helpfully funding it.
Well, and speaking of them, these big out-of-state union bosses that are really getting involved in Wisconsin politics, your challenger, Malin Mitchell, was handpicked by these out-of-state union bosses as well. And this is a guy, too, who, and we have the copy of the letter here that he had signed, that he sent to Governor Scott Walker and yourself, where they basically said that they're going to boycott about 100 businesses due to these reforms, but yet he denies it. What's your response to that?
Well, you can't deny facts, and that letter's been passed around like you wouldn't believe here in Wisconsin, because workers and families are frustrated by that. You know, this is about job creation. This election, this administration is about job creation, but also the families of this state want to talk about job creation as well. They don't want to talk about boycotts. You know, when you ask people to boycott a Wisconsin company, to starve a Wisconsin company of its income so that it is forced to either lay off its workers or shut its doors, I don't understand how that helps Wisconsin workers. You know what, Dana, it doesn't help Wisconsin workers. Let's not even be rhetorical about this. You know, this is what's at stake right here. People who will stop at nothing in order to threaten. You know, someone who issues a letter threatening businesses, threatening jobs, or people who will stand up to those who would threaten. People who would stand up and say, hey, listen, you know, we got the taxpayers' backs. You know, you may have the special interests who are funding you and who you will be beholden to, but that's not who we are. And every single day, we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the taxpayers and the hardworking families who asked us to do a budget without raising taxes, which is exactly what we did.
Right, and save teachers' jobs as well. And of course, Wisconsin's been climbing in the business rankings as well. And I just read a report that shows a very positive outlook when it comes to summer hiring. All of these things, your challenger is apparently against.
You know, he's not real vocal about it, though. They've they've got a tough situation that they're up against here, Dana, and they're not offering any plans of their own. They're simply criticizing what we have accomplished, but it's tough to even criticize anymore because we racked up so many victories for Wisconsinites. You know, these aren't political victories. These are victories for our families, victories for our state. You know, $1 billion saved between state and local governments, $154 million surplus at the end of our biennial budget. 94% of our job creators say that we're headed in the right direction. We've got victory on top of victory on top of win. This is all good.
And this is winning over Wisconsin voters. There was another study that was published about a week and a half ago, which shows that Wisconsin voters, they're looking at this platform that Democrats are selling about repealing these reforms. It's on the bottom of their list of priorities. They're happy right now. They see teachers' jobs saved. They see a surplus. And that's that message. You can sell voters on that. Is that what you're seeing on the campaign trail?
We are. We sense a wonderful tide of momentum here in Wisconsin, but we urge our voters and our supporters not to be complacent, because we know that this is a last grasp at power for these special interest groups who are desperate to maintain the grip they have on our government, your government, and our federal government. They're going to stop at nothing, and we understand that. We know that this is going to be a tight race, and so not one person can sit at home, and not one person can sit on their hands when they can join up at RebeccaForReal.com or ScottWalker.org. We want people to understand what's at stake here, because what's at stake is not just the future of Wisconsin, but the future of our country. For our opponents to weaponize the recall and use this function of our Constitution in order to exact political revenge on folks they disagree with is something that our founding fathers never intended, Dana.
Absolutely. And for those watching, there is a money bomb going on today right now for Wisconsin's Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch. Rally for Rebecca is that hashtag. And Lieutenant Governor, I will see you on June 2nd. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon, and keep up the great work.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dana.
Right, take care. Thanks. Next, folks, an inside look at how the leftist radicals like Occupy Wall Street operate.
When the government threatened their freedom, he was the last to believe in their cause.
You want me to make an army out of a group of peasants?
But became the first willing to die for it.
Today we're going to send a message. Freedom is our wives, our children, and we will defend it or die trying. Que viva Cristo Rey!
Andy Garcia, Eva Longoria. For Greater Glory, rated R, in theaters this Friday.
In 2000, the U.S. national debt was $5.6 trillion, and gold was $272 an ounce. By 2010, the U.S. debt was $13.5 trillion. Gold had risen to $1,421. Today, our government is projecting over $20 trillion of debt in the year 2016. Isn't it time you own gold? You can't control federal spending, but you can control where you put your investment dollars. Goldline has safely delivered billions of dollars in gold to its clients for over 50 years. Diversifying with gold is a smart strategy, and it's easy to get started. Call Goldline and get your free investor kit. Be sure to ask about our price guarantee program. Use your credit card for safety and convenience, and enjoy free shipping. Call Goldline now and buy gold with confidence. Get started today with Goldline.
The TRS Files, True Tax Resolution Stories.
Hello, I'm Gary, and I'm not a paid actor. I went from owing $43,000 to the Internal Revenue Service to paying them $1,000.
If you owe the IRS over $20,000 or more in back taxes, have unfiled returns, or are under audit, call Tax Resolution Services now, 888-7804-TAX, or visit taxresolution.com/GBTV.
Like you, I would do anything to protect my family. That's why I have food insurance, the emergency food supply that guarantees my family's most basic needs, safe and nutritious food. These high-quality freeze-dried meals last up to 25 years and are compact, affordable, and delicious. Start with a 2-week supply or plan for several months, whatever's right for you. Provide security for your family. Order food insurance today.
Coming up on Real News from the Blaze tonight, the president has a kill list. Buck, fill us in.
The New York Times has an in-depth piece that asserts that the White House is basically deciding who lives and who dies when it comes to terrorists abroad. We're going to drill down into what that means and what this means for the drone program and its usage overall.
All right, that's up next on Real News from the Blaze, coming up at 6 o'clock.
Today is day 261 of Occupy Wall Street. Yes, 261 days of the Occupy Wall Street movement, if you can believe it. And now, suddenly, the group wants to play by the rules by taking its latest gripes to court. Guess the protesting isn't working? The occupiers filed a federal lawsuit in New York City claiming that local authorities destroyed $47,000 worth of their books, computers, and belongings last fall. Now, the moves that the left make are very specific and very strategic. My next guest has witnessed the inner workings. Brandon Darby is a former left-wing agitator, anarchist, who became an FBI informant. And now he is a conservative activist, and you speak out not only about the abuses of the system from the left, but also what the right can look out towards. Now, as someone who came from the left, and I had my midlife crisis at age 19, became a conservative on 9/11. What motivated you? How did you transition from being a left-wing activist to now being a voice of truth on the right?
Well, Dana, I usually describe it as a process that occurred. You know, initially, and this happens when you talk to a lot of people who went from left to right, is initially you start to find yourself disagreeing with a lot that's going on the right. And then it's a process before you actually come out and say, actually, I am a conservative, you know. Mm-hmm. In my case, I was very radical. I was a far leftist at one time. Now I realize that I was really buying into a false narrative that if you want to help people, you're a leftist, and if you want to help rich white people get richer, you're a conservative, you know. Now I know that's not the case, but at the time I didn't. And at some point, from organizing and so forth, I began to realize that the people that I had looked up to, as I started to associate with them and work with them more and get to know my heroes, I began to realize that they weren't so honest, and that the way that they presented what had actually occurred in different situations was based upon what benefited the worldview, rather than what the truth was.
Right. So you ended up working with the FBI because of an alleged bomb plot at the RNC convention in Denver.
Well, what happened is, like I said, I worked with former Black Panther Party members and Palestinian activists and so forth. And at some point, after I had begun to back away, I mean, I could go on and on. Like after my trip to Venezuela.
Yes, you have a fascinating story, by the way.
But I got away from the left. But a lot of the leaders kept coming to me and kept telling me things that they were doing. Mm-hmm. And one of them was a guy named Riyad Hamad with the Palestinian Children's Welfare Fund. And he had a plan to give money to people in Palestine to blow up Israelis. And I turned him into the FBI. And he killed himself after he was raided. It was a horrible situation. But that led to about 2 years of working undercover with the FBI, which culminated into the 2008 Republican National Convention, where these same groups who now have rebranded themselves as Occupy, they set out to disrupt and shut down the Republican Convention by any means necessary.
Right.
And that spawned several bomb plots.
And you, of course, this conversion didn't come without a lot of heat, as more people on the left realized that you had a change of heart. You know, these are people who always talk about diversity of thought and everything else. They didn't really accept the diversity that you underwent. They didn't accept that you went to the right, and you've taken a lot of heat for that.
I have taken an immense amount of heat. I'm currently in a lawsuit with the New York Times over that heat. From the farthest blogs, the most anarchistic blogs, all the way to the New York Times. Yeah, it's been a, see, the thing is, like you brought up earlier in the show, is after the 60s, when the revolution failed for the left,
right,
they set out into different prongs to attack our system and to bring our system down.
Right.
And one of the things that they went into was bringing down us as a nation of laws and
right,
going after law enforcement. They learned that they can't literally go after the police with guns, and they
right,
can't call the police pigs. So now they just do it in a proverbial way.
Right, and this is you coming from the left, and now you're an activist, you know, with conservatives, you have the insight to be able to see some of the things that these folks are doing. You recently took part in a documentary from Stephen Bannon called Occupy Unmasked, where you went all across the country looking at these different Occupy movements. You were able to see the black bloc techniques that they used. You also spotted one activist named Lisa Fithian, who's been traveling around the country. She's a professional anarchist. Tell viewers a little bit about this lady.
Well, this is what's interesting that many people, I think, on the right don't understand, is just how, and I'm not saying the majority of liberals are evil, because I don't think so at all. I think they buy into a false narrative like I did. You know, a lot of people are there because they actually think that's how to help people. But on the left, there is such an evil element. Now, I'll explain this to you. I'll use this as an example. At the 2008 Republican National Convention, the overall liberal protest of the Republicans was led by a group called United for Peace and Justice.
Right.
Lisa Fithian sits on the steering committee for United for Peace and Justice. She's also she's paid by the SCIU. We all know the SCIU.
Yeah.
Okay, so the black bloc contingent, which would be what we call Occupy now, right? The black bloc anarchists, they set out across the country and they organized with the explicit stated goal to shut the RNC down by any means necessary.
And she was instrumental.
So she was leading the mainstream liberal protest. She was also leading the black bloc.
Right.
And organizing and training them. That black bloc group, I'm not saying she did it, but that black bloc group that she trained spawned several bomb plots. She also organized Camp Casey against George Bush.
A lot of things
Cindy
that she's
Sheehan.
been involved in.
Just across the board.
Right.
And so what they did, which is so important, is their goal was to shut the RNC down, was to interfere with the rights of conservatives to assemble and speak their minds.
Create chaos so opportunity is presented for another group to come in.
They needed to chain themselves up across the road. That was they called that the yellow group.
Right.
And then they had the green group, who was the majority of liberals who wouldn't know that they were providing cover for this illegal activity.
Yes.
And if that didn't work and give the yellow group time to lock down, then the red group would come in, the black mass, and fight
really quickly, because we have seconds left, I want you to tell me really fast about Occupy Unmasked, this film in which you took part. Give us a little insight on that. It's going to be released soon. Yes, it's Andrew Breitbart, myself, Lee Stranahan, Mandy Nagy, a few other prominent names, Anita Moncrief from the right. Acorn.
And we are holding the Occupy movement accountable, and we are step by step walking through in Occupy Unmasked exactly what they are, exactly who's behind them, and exactly where their fundings come from. It's occupyunmasked.org. Brandon Darby, thank you for your bravery and standing up. We really appreciate it. And we can watch for Brandon and Occupy Unmasked as well. Now, folks, the United Nations, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. The United Nations has been around for more than 60 years. But what has it really accomplished? According to documentary filmmaker Ami Horowitz, this global body is filled with example after example of waste, fraud, and abuse. He exposes numerous examples of these violations in his groundbreaking documentary, You and Me, love that title, which is going to be shown in select theaters and available on demand on June 1st. He recently sat down with Glenn to discuss his new film. Take a look.
How does the UN define terrorism?
Well, technically, the United Nations so far has not been able to define terrorism.
No, the UN member states have not been able to agree upon a definition of terrorism.
Definition of terrorism is a very difficult thing.
And this is one of the pending matters in the United Nations.
My own view, quite frankly, is that terrorism is rather like pornography. You might not be able to define it, but you know it when you see it. Since defining the threat is so important to fighting it, I thought to myself, how could I help the UN find a definition for terrorism? Do you have anything that has like a definition for a word?
Like a dictionary?
That's right.
Right behind you.
Excellent. Thank you.
This is a clip from the new documentary about the United Nations called You and Me. The film exposes the global organization's ineptitude, the scandals, the abuses of power. The writer, the director, the producer is Ami Horowitz. He is also a GBTV contributor. You are an amazing filmmaker. I have not seen this yet. Everyone who I know who has seen it, people that are
you didn't have to admit that. You could just.
I always do. People I respect say it is one of the best, if not the best, documentaries I've ever seen. It is strangely, unbelievably frightening and funny at the same time.
Yeah, actually, we banned the word documentary from my office. We call it docutainment, TM. So, because, you know, at the end of the day, you're right. If we just made a straight documentary about the UN, I mean, who wants to watch 90 minutes of, you know, medicine being fed down your throat? So we had to really create this kind of entertaining package to put it in. So we hired guys from The Onion, Michael Moore's writers and editors, writer from The Daily Show.
That's frightening.
And they all worked together, put together this really...
How did they feel about doing an how did Michael Moore's people feel about doing an anti-UN thing?
You know, at the end of the day, they don't realize, they don't see any kind of politics behind it. There's right and there's wrong. And when I pitched them on what the UN is doing and when they started filming it and editing it, these guys were as outraged as you and me.
Sure.
And I specifically tried to craft something which didn't go skew left, skew right, but just said, here's the deal, the truth.
Yeah, here's the truth. I know it's a wild concept here. You were actually threatened. I don't know. Did we ever find that thing from The Untouchables? One of my favorite movies.
A phenomenal movie.
Yeah. There's a scene from The Untouchables that I want you to see, because I have heard that this is exactly what happened to you.
Okay.
Go ahead and roll that.
Hey, nice house. I said, nice house. You live there? Little girl's having a birthday, huh?
Yes.
Nice to have a family.
Yes, it is.
Man should take care. See that nothing happens to you.
Happen to you?
Is that shot from my house?
Yeah. Did it happen to you?
Something very, very eerily similar to that, yeah. Well, we had two kind of crazy incidents, and the first was something similar to that, where I came out of my apartment just about 6 months ago in New York. You know, Upper West Side of New York, nowhere super dangerous. There's a guy waiting outside, very dapperly dressed, and he's just said, are you Ami Horowitz? And my spidey sense started tingling a little bit. And the next thing he said was, is this movie more important than your family? And I said, what? And before I had a chance to react, you know, the guy jumped into his car and, you know, into the taxi and sped away. And, you know, of course, I was about to put him into my kung fu grip. But, you know, luckily he got away before I went into action.
That was the first thing.
That was the second thing. The first thing that happened was we were shooting in the Ivory Coast, and we were exposing a UN peacekeeper massacre of unarmed Ivorians. And we came back to our hotel room after a long day of shooting, and I walked into my room, and the room was perfectly made up by the maid, except the safe in my room was open. The money and the passport were still there. The SIM card for my phone was taken out. Under my pillow, I slept with a hunting knife because it was a pretty rough part of the world. That was gone, but there was so daintily put on my pillow a picture with a guy with his head clean blown off, as a nice warning that maybe I wasn't wanted here. But I'm here, so it's all good.
I know. So what is it that you, what is it that people don't want you to tell in this movie? What is it that you found?
I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is we're paying north of $8 billion a year for an organization which is working against American interest. And I think they're scared that once we wake up and realize that, the gravy train will stop to the tune of billions of dollars a year. And the last thing in the world any of these people want is that gravy train to stop, because once the U.S. wakes up and says, why are we funding something that's working directly against our interests and our allies' interests?
Give me the example of the UN work. I mean, this is not real hard, but give me the example. Yeah, I know. Give me some of the examples of what you document here.
I think one of the clearest examples of this is Iran and its pursuit of nuclear weapons. Here's an organization that I think, if you take a charitable view on how the UN views Iran, is that they're incompetent, right? And they can't get anything done, and they're the Keystone Cops. But you could take a more cynical view. And by the way, both these views can be compatible. They're not incompatible. That there are countries, and a lot of these countries have influence in the IAEA, who wouldn't mind seeing Iran have a nuclear weapon as a counterbalance to Israel. So I think that's one really stark and dangerous example of how these guys are working against our interests directly. Yet we're funding it, and we're funding the IAEA directly.
The movie takes on, in a joking manner, serious issues at times. You were over, was it Austria, Vienna?
Yep.
And you were going into the Iranian embassy.
Yeah.
Okay. Going into the Iranian embassy, never a good idea.
Not one of my brightest ones.
Yeah, right. What happened?
Well, we walked in there to confront this guy. Right here, this is the guy who's ostensibly trying to, prove to the world that they're not building a nuclear weapon. And I said, we're going to call BS. So we set up an appointment. We went in there. We met this guy. And we were very clear. We're like, listen, you're building nuclear weapons. Everything is pointing at that. Why are you lying? And he did his whole Diplo speak, and we went on and on, back and forth. And it came out in a really funny way. I mean, deadly serious at the end of the day. But, we're a little nervous because the Iranians have actually killed people in Austria. People who, and it's in the movie as well, we document that as well, where people who were standing up against them in the UN were killed inside the UN building. So we're a little nervous, but we tweeted out before we went into all our friends.
Just
we're
so
going in,
you know.
just so you know, I'm going to the Iranian embassy.
If I'm dead, it's a UN-related thing, and I was last seen in the Iranian embassy.
Whatever helps the box office. If that means my death, and so be it.
Any chance that you can dismantle the UN? Because I mean, honestly, this land was given, by the Ford Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it Ford? It was Rockefeller and the Russians and everybody else. I mean, it's a nightmare. If we could saw that piece of property off and float it out to another country, another country.
It's worth too much money. I don't want to do that. I'm going to resell as condos.
I'd be willing to do it. I'd be willing to give the land away to them just to get them to stop coming to our country.
Listen, I would be willing to give them more money if they worked properly. If they were really following their charter and trying to make this world a better place, what's $8 billion? What's $10 billion? I'm happy to do it. But that's not the case. So what's the chance of us dismantling them? Well, the first question is, what's the chance of us reforming them? There is a way to do it. There is a blueprint, and it all comes down to the U.S. waking up and saying, we're not going to give you any more funding until you've reformed yourself.
And they're going to be able to reform it because they don't really answer to anybody.
You're right. So I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? The alternative is creating an organization whose foundation, whose ethos are freedom and liberty. And if you build it on that basis and you only allow countries who believe in that to be part of it, I think you can have an organization that will work well.
Well, you had that with with NATO. They're trying to take NATO, absolutely take NATO apart. We can't even do that with our own country. That's what the United States government was founded on. And we're not even getting that from the United States government without corruption.
You're right. I mean, at the end of the day, here's why the UN works in the favor of these bad actors. It's because we don't play well with people who we should be playing well with. France and us, we just don't get along. And that's a problem because the bad actors, they get along great. And, what does a country like Iran, a theocratic, dictatorship, have anything in common with these godless communist North Korea? Nothing. But guess what? They work together against a common enemy. And we can't do that. And that's why I think we're in the spot we're in now.
You won't get the UN to stand up for anything, and yet the UN was in South Dakota standing up saying the United States has to return the land to the Native Americans.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, you didn't hear that?
You're kidding me.
No, it happened 2 weeks ago. Got to give Mount Rushmore and everything else, got to give it back to the Native Americans.
It's insane.
Who the hell are you? Get out of our country.
It's unbelievable what these guys, the chutzpah and the balls these guys have.
The thing that people don't understand is these guys may not be armed, the blue helmets may not be armed, but they are wildly dangerous. Wildly dangerous. These peacekeeping forces have done more damage, more death I mean, they're in some cases, they're a roving rape squad, right?
The day before the movie comes out is UN Peacekeeping Day. Couldn't be more perfect. But, you know, I'd add another thing to this conversation is that, you know, and the reason why I chose this medium, film, is that we conservatives are losing a really important battle in the culture war. And we're losing it, I mean, on a daily basis.
I know we are.
And I think that if you look at the mistake the left made with talk radio, when guys like you and Limbaugh basically took over that medium, they gave it to you, and they've been hurting ever since. We're making the same mistake with this medium. That's why I wanted to make this and why I think people should support it. Because if we don't support it, and I tell you, if they don't support it, I'm not making another movie again.
Right.
And we're going to see this really important, you know, forum to the left, and we're going to lose.
I love this guy. You and Me is going to be in select theaters nationwide. It's also available on video on demand June 1st. Please support this. You and I are on exactly the same page. It's some of the things that we're going to be announcing next week as well. We have surrendered too much territory on the culture. Film, music, television, entertainment of all kinds. It's time to take it back. And you are doing a great job. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Back in a minute.
It's an unpredictable world. Disaster can strike at any time. That's why stove in a can should always be part of your emergency survival plan. With power out and gas lines down, stove in a can cooks your food and rapidly boils water. Portable, safe, and easy to use. With an all-natural waterproof fuel source you can store indefinitely. Say goodbye to dangerous propane, lighter fluid, and gas. Don't wait until it's too late. Stock up today and protect your family. Special bundle offers available at stoveinacan.com.
Bringing a firearm into your home is one of the most important decisions you can make. If you are considering gun ownership, CheaperThanDirt.com is here to help you make a responsible and informed choice. We understand it is a personal decision how you choose to protect your family. We offer thousands of choices of firearms, ammunition, and accessories to suit your individual needs. Be responsible, be proactive, and exercise your Second Amendment right. Find us online at CheaperThanDirt.com. That's CheaperThanDirt.com.
Hi everyone, this is Amelia from FreedomWorks, here to invite you to a very special event. Free Pack is a national gathering of Americans interested in restoring freedom. This year's event will feature speeches from Glenn Beck, Dick Armey, Matt Kibbe, and many of the biggest names in the freedom movement. So go to freepack.com today to pre-register and help restore liberty in your community and across the nation.
Is your nonstick pan a sticking nightmare? Don't live in fear. The solution is here with Organic Kitchenware, the new nonstick cookware with revolutionary green ceramic coating. Now you can saute or fry with little or no grease or fat. Foods never stick, so you never scrub. Look how with just water, burnt fudge cleans up in a breeze. Don't worry about eggs sticking to the pan. They'll slide right out. Order your 10-inch Organic fry pan right now for just $19.99. If it ever dulls or damages, we'll replace it. It's the pan that slips and slides for life. But we're still not done. Call or click right this minute and you can double your order. You get 2 Organic 10-inch fry pans with recipe books and a lifetime warranty. A whopping $220 value, all yours for $19.99. And when you call, find out about free shipping.
Call 1-800-603-7571. But hurry, we're giving away a special offer on a second Organic pan with 2 days' orders. So call 1-800-603-7571 and find out about free shipping. That's 1-800-603-7571. Call now.
If you are just joining us, welcome to GBTV. I am Dana Lash in for Glenn. Voter fraud is a very serious issue, but has recently been overlooked by many government officials, like, for instance, Attorney General Eric Holder.
These voter ID laws are solutions that deal with a problem that does not really exist. These laws that disenfranchise people, up to perhaps as many as 800,000 in Texas, are unnecessary and go counter to the great tradition of the American people, which was expand the opportunity that people have to vote. What we're talking about here is a constitutional right. This is not a privilege. The right to vote is something that's fundamental to who we are as Americans.
Yes, the right to vote is fundamental to who we are as Americans. But how can we ensure that the right is protected if politicians are denying that the problem even exists? In this upcoming election, more steps are being taken to address voter fraud. There are currently 9 states who have voter ID laws in place, and groups like True the Vote are working to educate voters and train poll watchers. Now, last month, True the Vote kicked off its 2nd annual summit in Houston. Watch this.
The media is telling you what to believe, but the media won't show things for what they are.
What you are up against should both frighten and motivate you at the same time. Go back to your states, go to the local library, go to the local law school, and go get your election code.
Let's keep on changing this country. Let's keep on fighting for integrity. And let's keep on believing that the best days of this country are ahead of us and not behind us.
Joining me now are Catherine Engelbrecht, the president of True the Vote, and John Funn, the author of Stealing Elections, How Voter Fraud Threatens Our Democracy. Now, I want to direct your attention both really quick. You both have beverages here, lemonade, and I swear this is going to make sense, but June 13th is the National Bake Sale Lemonade Stand Everything Day. The interesting thing to me here is that the Department of Justice worries more about regulations when it comes to kids and lemonade stands than it does about the work that both of you are doing in maintaining voter integrity and making sure that we have fair elections. And I'm going to come to John Funn, who's one of my favorite authors, by the way, in just a second. But True the Vote, the group that you're working with, this is really a revolutionary group. This is a bunch of citizens coming together to make sure that voter integrity is upheld. And your group, you've been around for a couple of years. You've taken a lot of heat. What message is it that you are wanting to transmit to the public with True the Vote?
I think the quintessential message of what we represent is that if our elections are not truly fair, we're not truly free, bottom line. And I think it's something that is resonating across the country. People are recognizing there's so much passion out there, but if we don't translate this into action and if we don't really shore up the most fundamental underpinning of our democracy, then everything else that we talk about is on quicksand.
Right. Now, what inspiration did you have for starting this group? I mean, obviously you were frustrated by some of the things that you've seen, and you decided to organize this group. Now you just told me before the segment, 32 states now have True the Vote. What was the inspiration for this? This is a big undertaking.
Well, it was, but it was certainly, we didn't go looking to be, the election integrity sheriffs. We, in 2009, thought that we would go and work at the polls. We had heard that there was a need, which there was a huge void of the necessary number of volunteers in this country. So we thought, well, we'll go do that, and we'll check that off our good citizen list. That'll be a one-day gig.
Right.
And what we saw at the polls is the reason I'm here, because we saw things that ranged from confusion, well-intentioned, but just a confusion of process, all the way through to election fraud. And when you see something like that, you have a choice to make. Do you go home and think, well, geez, I hope somebody does something about that?
Right.
I couldn't look at my children and think that was happening, and one day they might not have an opportunity to cast a free and fair ballot.
Right.
So we stepped in.
If not us, then who? If
That's
not
it.
now, then when?
Then
definitely. And John Funn literally wrote the book on stealing elections. What is the biggest threat to a fair election?
Well, actually, I'll have a new book out called Who's Counting in August, which will be a sequel to Stealing
Just in
Elections.
time.
Exactly. We have two civil rights in this country, the right not to be prevented from voting or intimidated from voting. We fought a civil rights struggle in the 60s. Over that, we need to preserve those gains. But everyone in your audience has a second civil right, the right not to have their vote canceled out by someone who shouldn't be voting, whether they're an illegal alien, someone who's dead, someone who doesn't exist, someone who's voting twice. We can do both. We can make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Unfortunately, the Obama Justice Department, an awful lot of people, only recognize one civil right and not the second civil right. And I think that the Justice Department is being derelict in its duties. And part of that reason may be where Barack Obama comes from. As I've noted in my book, he used to be an organizer for ACORN, the infamous voter registration fraud group that finally went bankrupt a couple years ago, and he was their top lawyer for key cases. This is a man who I think has been looking the other way when it comes to making it hard to cheat for a long, long time.
And you would think that Eric Holder and the Department of Justice would welcome groups like True the Vote in making sure that voter integrity is being upheld, that we're having fair elections, that people aren't being disenfranchised. But kind of the opposite has been happening. You've had lawsuits filed against you by some groups who have some very questionable funding.
Yes, we have.
Put it lightly.
We have met with all kinds of things that I would have never anticipated in my wildest dreams. True the vote. How can you be against True the Vote? If you're against True the Vote, what are you for? It really begs the question: what could we be so close to that certain groups will do anything to stop the average citizen from just working at the polls?
You found thousands and thousands of cases of voter fraud. I know in Houston there are examples of 30 some odd people being all registered at the same address, and this would fall to the Secretary of State to clean something like this up. And you and I were talking just a little bit on break. Well, in my state of Missouri, it's not happening.
No, some secretaries of state are more interested than others. Let's say in Minnesota, there was a secretary of state who wasn't particularly interested in cleaning up the voting process. We had a key Senate race in Minnesota, 2008. Al Franken was finally declared the winner by 314 votes after 6 months of counting. Well, we now know that something like 1,200 felons voted. And by the way, 197 people have been convicted of voting illegally in that election.
But it doesn't exist, though.
It doesn't exist, even though 197 people. And by the way, more are being convicted every day. What we now know is Al Franken provided the 60th vote in the United States Senate for the Democrats so they could break a filibuster. Obamacare would not have passed the United States Senate without Al Franken's vote, which was probably the result of a stolen election. So if you don't think voter fraud matters, Al Franken proves it, because we have Obamacare because of him.
Wow. And now we're up looking at this, another huge election in Wisconsin, and both of you have been involved heavily in this. I know True the Vote has been up there in the trenches on the ground in Wisconsin.
Right.
Super big recall election June 5th. What have you found?
Well, Wisconsin is a unique case, because I think that they are the litmus test for what we're going to see in November. I think that if this recall passes, recall will become the new recount, will become the new lawsuit.
Right.
I think we're careening towards a place where major elections are going to end up in courts of law, and it's time for. There's so many things that citizens can do, and it's time for them to flex their muscles a little bit and get involved. And that's what we've been a part of, is helping train election observers. We're doing a webinar training tonight, in fact, all across Wisconsin.
But making Catherine's job a lot more difficult in Wisconsin is the fact that the state passed a new voter ID law. You actually have to show ID. Amazing. You have to show ID for everything. You have to show ID to cash a check, to enter a federal building, to travel, to rent a video, but not to vote. Well, in Wisconsin, they passed the law. There were lawsuits by various left-wing groups blocking it, and sure enough, they have managed to prevent the voter ID law from being put into effect in time for this recall election. What an interesting coincidence.
Well, I can't thank you both enough, not only for being here with me this afternoon, but also talking about this. Catherine Engelbrecht with True the Vote, John Fun with your book, Stealing Elections.
And Who's Counting?
Who's Counting,
which
coming
will be
out
in August. On Amazon.com, you can pre-order it right now.
And we'll have to talk to you again then. Thank you both so much.
Thanks.
The latest victim of the left's war on women, a 16-year-old. Yeah, she joins us next.
Tatler Reusable Canning Lids. Family owned since 1976. That's right, Tatler Reusable Canning Lids. Yes, reusable, with a lifetime guarantee. Made in America, BPA free. Tatler Reusable Canning Lids. Because those who can, do. Get rid of the disposable lid. Go to reusablecanninglids.com. Tatler Reusable Canning Lids.
Okay, so has anybody actually started saving for college yet?
Oh, not me.
No, you got time.
Oh,
no, we actually started.
You have?
Really?
Sure. We figure you start saving a little now, or you'll borrow a lot later on.
Yeah, but how did you even know where to start?
Oh, I found out about the Gerber Life College Plan.
Call now for free information on the Gerber Life College Plan. It's easy.
It's pretty much worry-free.
Well, how could it be worry-free? What if something happens with the stock market?
No matter what happens, we get guaranteed safe growth.
So when she's ready for college, the money will be there.
And it doesn't take a lot of money to get started.
For as little as $10 a week, you can start saving for college and get guaranteed growth. Just call now.
Oh, it's a life insurance policy, too.
Oh, that's different.
And if she decides not to go to college, there's no penalty, so she can use the money for anything.
We've got to get started.
Yes, we do, because you're going to college.
Call 1-800-892-3073 for your free information. That's 1-800-892-3073.
Mortgage Lenders Live.
banks cheated and committed fraud, if you believe you're the victim of lender negligence, greed, or corruption, if your home is worth less than what you owe, if you're currently in or facing foreclosure, or if you have a sale date, 1-800-513-0934. Our job is to dramatically lower your mortgage balance or lower your interest rate to just 2% fixed for life. Take action now. When you lose your home, it will be too late. 1-800-513-0934.
If you're a diabetic and currently trying to lose weight, please stay tuned to this important message. A market trial offer is starting now for a revolutionary breakthrough in weight loss called glucosilin, and you are eligible to try it free for 30 days. Clinical studies of the key ingredient have shown this ingredient to be effective in accelerating weight loss. What's even more impressive is that it also supports healthy blood sugar metabolism at the same time. Call immediately to receive your free 30-day trial. 1-888-433-8171.
The left's war on women continues, but this time they're targeting a conservative teenager from North Carolina. 16-year-old Madeline McCauley has actually received death threats after she posted a YouTube video online sharing her views on gay marriage. Take a look.
Over 60% of North Carolinians believe that traditional marriage is the way to go. But unfortunately, North Carolina is now the bullseye for the left's hatred. The liberals and their media allies are trying to make this issue seem fresh, even though North Carolina is actually the 31st state to pass an amendment that defines marriage as between one man and one woman. Now, I want to be clear. I don't hate gay people, so stop trying to say that I do. I simply believe that traditional marriage is the most productive way and the biblical way to pursue a relationship. It is proven to be the healthiest environment for children. I also believe that marriage is not just some rite. It's making a covenant with God.
Yeah, YouTube called that hate speech. Progressives called it hate speech, but yet they left up a video of an adult man calling Madeline a ton of names. Madeline and her mother, Pamela, join us now. Thank you both so much for being here. And Madeline, I have to say, first of all, kudos for being the future of conservative grassroots, because you are. Secondly, has this incident at all, has this experience deterred you from going out and speaking your mind, not just about politics, but also about faith?
You know, Dana, it actually hasn't, because I look at people like you, I look at Sarah Palin, S.E. Cupp, all these people who have hate spewed at them every day for speaking the truth. And, you know, it encourages me to see that y'all have such tough skin, and you're kind of my role model to keep on going.
Well, what do you hope that other conservatives take away from this when they see that you uploaded this video, they see you stand strong, which I think lesser people would have folded and you didn't. They see you stand so strong. What do you hope that other conservative teens take away from what you did?
You know, I hope they see that we are actually in the majority in this country, and the left is really just the loud minority. And so I hope that they see that when you stand up for what you believe in, yes, you're going to get a lot of hate, but you're actually going to get even more support. I've been amazed at how many emails and Facebook messages I've gotten that have just said, good job. And, you know, that's one of the most gratifying things you can receive.
Did it surprise you, the reaction that you received?
It did. It very much surprised me. I've been really shocked, actually, at how many conservative teenagers have contacted me. I've probably received over 50 emails from conservative teenagers across America, and it's been absolutely amazing.
Now, I have to ask you, Mom, I'm the mother of 2 little boys, and they're not old enough to be putting videos on YouTube yet. Madeline has told us that she wasn't raised to really be a political activist, but, you know, you vote and you're interested in politics. What reaction did you have when you see that your daughter received this sort of hateful attack simply because she posted a video, very respectful, talking about this issue from a scriptural perspective?
Well, her dad and I were, first of all, shocked at some of the vile, vulgar, distasteful comments that came her way. But over time, that is kind of, we've gotten, I don't want to say used to it, but Madeline continues to remind me, don't read those messages, Mom.
Yes.
And we're just here to encourage her, to stand behind her and support her. And help her to remain strong in her own convictions.
Well, you've done a fantastic job. I'm looking at some of these tweets that they have sent to her, and I saw a lot of this happen online. They called her psycho and all kinds of other derogatory names. Thank you for standing strong. Thank you for being such a great example to young conservative women, and I hope that you'll keep it up. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again soon. Thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it. All right, folks, I'm Dana Lash. Thank you so much for joining me this past hour. Have a fabulous rest of your night. Take care.
Breaking news tonight. We've got real news. This just in.
Real news from The Blaze.
Welcome back, everybody, from your Memorial Weekend to Real News from The Blaze. This week, the House and Energy Commerce Subcommittee on Communications and Technology will be holding hearings on the United Nations' desire for increased international authority over the Internet. While the idea is backed by nations like China and Russia, it's meeting a considerable amount of resistance on Capitol Hill. The debate is part of the lead up to the World Conference of International Telecommunications, which is set for December in Dubai. Will Kane, with China and Russia leading the effort, what could possibly go wrong?
No, right. The countries that are dedicated to free speech and internet usage. I think these are your champions right here. I think what's interesting, Amy, is for many people like the internet regulation. It's the wild, wild west. You can say whatever you want. There's nobody looking out, overlooking what's going on the internet. But if you think about it, there is an organizational structure to the internet. I don't want to say, a regulating body. Think about this. Where do we come up with our extensions? .com, .gov, .org, or how do we ensure that companies don't or people don't cyber squat? That's when somebody says, hey, you know what, this GBTV.com, that's getting some traffic. What if I take over GBTV.org? Who keeps that kind of thing from happening? So I think in order to answer that question, you've got to go back in history. How did the internet evolve? How did any kind of organizational structure evolve for the internet? Well, before 1997, as we've often heard, the internet was developed out of the Defense Department. DARPA, it was called, an initiative under the Defense Department. And 1997, President Bill Clinton decides, you know what, let's privatize oversight of the internet. And he goes to the Department of Commerce and he says, handle this. So the Department of Commerce creates this acronym called ICANN, which stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Now, ICANN is the company that oversees all your extensions, your URLs, your domain service names, your DSNs. It is the one that assigns names. And I think that's essentially its tool for enforcement, assigning and taking away your accessibility of your name, your URL. Well, ICANN is a nonprofit corporation in California, and its governing philosophy is essentially what they call a multi-stakeholder process. It brings in businesses, small URL holders, many different entities to give input on what the regulating process for the internet should be. Now, this is not what the UN likes. The UN, or several countries inside of the UN, do not like this process. They feel like it's not a secure enough environment for data. This is their reasoning, at least. And they make two big complaints. One, governmental bodies have a lack of influence over ICANN. And two, the U.S. has a legacy of influence over ICANN. They doubt that this is a free and clear institution from U.S. involvement.
Our own vice president invented the internet.
That is true,
right.
Or so it is said. So that is their complaint. And so now China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, some other countries inside of the UN say, let's do this. Let's make this governed under the United Nations. And that way more countries can have input over what goes on inside of the internet. Now, I think everyone, certainly at this table I would suspect, views that with a certain level of suspicion. And Matt, you and I are having a conversation earlier about, even at the philosophical level, where the internet is today, at this kind of decentralized governing process, to what the UN hopes to see it become, really has a philosophical bearing.
Well, you can see where governments would be nervous about this, because the internet is a perfect example of a bottom-up community-based governance with a very simple set of rules. ICANN basically serves as a traffic cop. And other than that, the community governs, the community polices itself, and top-down governments, you can imagine, are totally freaked out by this. And this is the tool by which people take back their freedom. It's very Hayekian in the way it emerges spontaneously, the way it solves problems that everybody says are unsolvable. It's done because you're able to tap into the decentralized genius of real people. I would say that, you know, as big of a threat as the UN is, and we should watch this because big governments, particularly totalitarian governments, they do want to stop this. But we'll do it one piece at a time. We're not going to do it all at once. The UN's not going to take over the internet tomorrow.
Right. Let me bring in Professor Milton Mueller. He's a Syracuse University School of Information Studies. Professor, I just gave a little short, I hope accurate view of what the governing history of the internet has been, and basically explaining that ICANN, this kind of bottom-up regulatory or governing process of the internet, is described as a multi-stakeholder process. And my friend Matt Kibbe here was also talking about it. Can you explain to us exactly how that works, this multi-stakeholder process? How do we regulate the internet right now?
Well, first of all, ICANN is not regulating the internet. As you correctly indicated in your introduction, it's regulating the domain name system primarily. It also has a role in Internet Protocol addresses, which is the IP addresses like the telephone numbers of the internet that are even more important than domain names. And you're right, ICANN makes a lot of policy decisions regarding the domain name system. But a lot of the conduct on the internet cannot be regulated through domain names, and so there's all kinds of other forms of control and regulation. The great thing about the internet is that it's a network of networks. It's simply a software for passing information from one network to another, and each of these networks can be independently administered. So at the most basic level, policies for networks are made by the network owner, and the internet simply interconnects all of these network owners. Now, and occasionally you have Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so these countries that are approaching the UN, like China and India and Russia, look at the history of ICANN and look at the history of the internet and suggest, you know, this was created under the United States Defense Department. It was privatized out of the Department of Commerce, and they see a legacy of influence of the United States government on this entire process, and I guess they feel kind of shut out of it. Do they have a legitimate complaint? Is the United States government holding some cards behind the scenes on ICANN and how the internet is run?
Well, it's very explicit about it. Yes, the U.S. government has a contract with ICANN called the IANA contract. It stands for the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority contract. And that's a kind of ultimate authority over ICANN. If the U.S. government takes that contract away from ICANN, it really doesn't have any authority over the domain name system or the IP addresses.
So do these countries have a legitimate complaint?
Well, the countries you're talking about simply want to participate in that power so that they could probably abuse it. So in that respect, I would say no, they don't have a legitimate complaint. But if you're talking about the fact that the U.S. has more authority over ICANN than any other government, yes, that's true, undeniably true.
All right, Professor, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time. So there it is, guys. I mean, is this something that we need to be sensitive towards? So we need to be sensitive towards China and Russia and the UN seeing perhaps the United States controlling the internet, although they've outsourced it, controlling the internet.
Could I ask a question for a point of clarification, whether or not we're sensitive to it? Do these countries and does the United Nations as an organization, as a technical, practical matter, have the ability to override this U.S. power and authority that apparently they're chafing under? If we don't participate technically or politically, can they just go ahead and do it anyway?
I would not think that's a possibility. You know, I think we have talked, and Buck can speak to this, I think, better than I can, but at various times during the Arab Spring, could Egypt turn off the internet? Could Mubarak shut down Twitter? And I think that we met mixed results in that process. They were largely unsuccessful. So the idea of actually regulating the entire internet, much of which the infrastructure is based here in the United States, sounds absolutely fantastical to me.
Well, there are some problems that jump out at me right away. One is there's no way this will make the internet function better. The idea that adding regulations, adding government bureaucracy to a system that runs on being free and being easy to use and being accessible to anyone, the idea that you would add regulations onto that, it's just inherently a bad, I think we all agree, it's inherently a bad idea. And the other side of this is that the countries that are so interested in this, I mean, they're already engaged in, Russia and China, a large degree of censorship on the web. Right. And they're getting much more savvy at it, too. And they recognize that allowing certain things that keep their populations occupied, whether it's, you know, pirated material online or whatever, while disallowing things like political speech, they're sort of drawing these lines in the sand that are very specific to those countries. So we're already seeing censorship in large part from these countries, and I think that if you were to allow them to get more of a hand on this, you'll just see that get even stronger. I mean, the internet up to this point has been a tool largely for liberation and making the world a smaller place. It would not be hard to watch that change, and all of a sudden it becomes a tool of oppression. It is the greatest surveillance tool ever devised. I've said it before.
It's hard to overlook the countries that are advocating for this UN control with that in mind.
Well, this all sounds very highly anti-free market and actually anti-globalization to me. I mean, in the typical sense, the sort of Negri empire sense of a world without walls, if that's how we're going to live, it seems really weird to suggest that the United States somehow is proprietary over this technology. Gutenberg invented the printing press, but no one suggests that Germany have its hands on all the books that are made. I mean, so I'm a little resistant to the idea that the United States somehow has a little more influence over how the internet is used and disseminated than other places. But I think when you raise other issues like censorship in these other countries, and even here at home, issues like net neutrality, issues like the fairness doctrine, you really have to think very carefully about how this technology is used in its application of speech.
Well, let me bring that up. It was just reported in the Chinese official government press that China, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan submitted a letter to the UN, to the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, September of last year, asking him to distribute an international code of conduct for information security covering political, military, social, economic, cultural, technical, and other types of information, that there would be sort of a rules of the road in terms of how these topics apparently are disseminated on the internet, which basically to me sounds like censorship, right?
Well, there's the camel's nose under the tent, and there's all sorts of reasons why governments say that they have to get a handle on this thing. But when Vladimir Putin starts talking about his concerns for protecting democracy, you just got to call
and
BS
data
on
privacy.
That. You got to call it.
And the fact that countries have already raised regulations are oftentimes a lead into taxation. And that they may be using sort of a new internet architecture as a means to facilitate taxing internet transactions, whether it's clicks, whatever the case may be, that should also raise eyebrows.
Don't you think that part actually is inevitable, though?
It's actually on the list
the
of
taxing.
Things. It's actually on the list of things.
They want to do it, but so
UN
far it's been fought against.
Yeah.
It's on the list of things the UN is suggesting they want to accomplish with this measure. They want authority over ICANN, one. They want international control over data privacy and cybersecurity, which basically sounds like the icing on the cake as far as C. Isn't this good? And three, they want revenue-generating opportunities for state-owned phone companies and data service providers. If they can control the internet
power
there,
and money.
Then they can tax.
No country with a sophisticated cyber infrastructure is going to cede any of its national security authorities in terms of cyber stuff to the UN. No one's going to do that. So that part of it would have to, I think, be excised or just disavowed.
Where has the internet failed? You bring up a great point, Matt. Right now, it's been a huge tool for innovation, for economic growth. And where has it failed? In privacy and security, some would suggest. That will be, my metaphor will be Trojan horse, yours will be camel nose, but that will be the Trojan horse that this freedom will come under attack from, this concept of cybersecurity and privacy.
The question I have about all of this, too, is why are we having a hearing on any of this if we know that the U.S. position is that it's absurd, ludicrous, and we're not going to be handing over control of the internet to the United Nations? I mean, in their own memorandum, the committee says that there's bipartisan agreement that the United States should stand firm in international negotiations and oppose any treaty provisions by any of this. So, Essie, why is a Republican-controlled House even having hearings on this?
Oh, I can think of 1,000 reasons to not have hearings on lots of other important issues that actually matter in an election here. Again, politics of distraction and who knows.
Pretending to care what other countries think has its own appeal, I guess.
Sure, there's that too.
But it's a good thing that both parties actually support the idea that the internet should be free, and it shows you just how much power there is in this tool, that they're afraid to take on the community. And if anybody that's a Jeffersonian Democrat, if you believe in bottom-up governance, you got to draw a line in the sand. Any of these ruses to get your hands on the internet, we got to stop it.
No one owns the internet.
No one does. Well, the carnage in Syria is owned by the Syrian government, and it continues with UN confirming the execution-style deaths of women and children at the hands of the Assad regime. Inaction is no longer an option. We'll discuss what the options are when we come back.
government threatened their freedom, he was the last to believe in their cause.
You want me to make an army out of a group of peasants?
But became the first willing to die for it.
Today we're going to send a message. Freedom is our wives, our children, and we will defend it or die trying. Que viva Cristo Rey!
Andy Garcia, Eva Longoria. For Greater Glory, rated R, in theaters this Friday.
Food independence, emergency preparedness, self-reliance. MyPatriotSupply.com. Get our survival seed vault and feed your family from your own garden for just $37.95. Our non-hybrid heirloom seeds are genuinely American, just like you. Your survival needs and survival seeds are at MyPatriotSupply.com. MyPatriotSupply.com. Self-reliance. MyPatriotSupply.com.
The TRS Files, True Tax Resolution Stories.
Hello, I'm Gary, and I'm not a paid actor. I went from owing $43,000 to the Internal Revenue Service to paying them $1,000.
If you owe the IRS over $20,000 or more in back taxes, have unfiled returns, or are under audit, call Tax Resolution Services now, 888-7804-TAX, or visit taxresolution.com/GBTV.
Like you, I would do anything to protect my family. That's why I have food insurance, the emergency food supply that guarantees my family's most basic needs, safe and nutritious food. These high-quality freeze-dried meals last up to 25 years and are compact, affordable, and delicious. Start with a 2-week supply or plan for several months, whatever's right for you. Provide security for your family. Order food insurance today.
As Americans enjoyed their long weekend, the conflict in Syria reached new levels of brutality as violence continued across the war-torn nation. Despite the efforts of the international community to bring the year of bloodshed to a diplomatic end, the two sides appear less likely than ever to come to terms with one another. Essie, we know you've been following this closely. What happened this weekend?
Well, let me start with what happened for me this weekend. Like many of us, I was spending time with family, enjoying the weekend, honoring our fallen servicemen and women. And flipping through the channels came to a veritable orgy of patriotic movies that were playing. I watched all of them. But one in particular, Air Force One, it's very fun to revisit. It's a 1990s classic with Harrison Ford playing the president. And we came to a part early in the movie where, as the president, he is addressing a largely Russian contingent, international contingent, talking about deposing a Kazakhstan dictator from office. And this is the speech he gives. Take a look.
Radek's regime murdered over 200,000 men, women, and children, and we watched it on TV. We let it happen. People were being slaughtered for over a year, and we issued economic sanctions and hid behind a rhetoric of diplomacy. How dare we? The dead remembered. Real peace is not just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice.
Yeah, that movie goes on to kick ass. And for me, as silly as it may be, and I know that real life is not like the movies, this really was a very real reminder of what the rhetoric from our president could sound like on Syria. And wouldn't it be even better if it were backed up by some action? Just to remind everyone, in case you were hot dogging and hamburgering this weekend and missed it, here's what happened. On Friday, there was a massacre in Hula that killed 100 people, injured over 300, many of whom were women and children. We have a photo from that in case you missed it. Really horrific stuff. Russia and Syria quickly came out to denounce this shelling as by the hands of the regime forces, and it's now, of course, been confirmed that many of these deaths were carried out execution style. In other news, the U.S. has joined Canada, Britain, Australia, France, other countries in expelling Syrian diplomats out of the country, which begs the question, if all the diplomats are gone, how exactly does diplomacy work and the political process? Well, all of that news aside, that's really hardly moved either the UN and Kofi Annan or the White House. The White House came out today and said that it is still decided that military intervention in Syria is unnecessary, would lead to more chaos and carnage. And Kofi Annan is sticking to his guns in saying that he is committed to this 6-point peace plan. And we have his statement from earlier today. Let's play it.
I urge the government to take bold steps to signal that it is serious in its intention to resolve this crisis peacefully, and for everyone involved to help create the right context for a credible political process. And this message of peace is not only for the government, but for everyone, every individual with a gun.
So everybody here is sticking to their guns. Of course, only Assad's seem loaded. And worse, Kofi Annan seems to suggest that as the Assad regime is shelling innocent women and children, defending them with force is apparently part of the problem. He'd like you to surrender your guns as well. At some point, I think it becomes clear in all of this that diplomacy and the political process have sort of run its course, and eventually the UN's inaction here has to be viewed as negligence, perhaps even criminal negligence, as this humanitarian crisis in the Middle East devolves. And I want to bring in our guest here, Christian Whiten. Welcome. He is former State Department senior advisor and now a principal with DC International Advisory. And Christian, let me ask you, putting moral obligations aside and putting politics of this aside, I think we can clearly say that whatever we're all doing here isn't working. So rather than come out and feign outrage, why don't we just say, we don't care about Syria. We don't really care what happens there, and so we are not going to do anything.
Right, you'd think that would be sort of a cleaner answer, but the Obama administration, it's weird. They've said that they do care deeply, and they've identified some of their interests there, but they've run this through the UN, as you've pointed out, and frankly, it seems that the priority number one for this administration is breathing life into the United Nations, even though the UN process, for the reasons you cite, the fecklessness of Kofi Annan, but also because of Russia and Russia's friendliness with Syria and inability to allow anything, unfriendly to the Assad regime to happen in New York. That's a real problem too. So this just isn't working.
So what are we left with? If I'm looking at the politics of this, and I'm looking at the Obama administration, to really put this in crass terms, what about the idea, I'm trying to find ways to shake them into action. What about the idea that Israel has said if Assad is removed, it would feel safer? And we're all very concerned, I know, over here, that Israel's first strike on Iran will come inconveniently before our November elections. Wouldn't this be some kind of trigger to send Obama into action in Syria to sort of take that out of the equation?
Yeah, I think you have a real breakdown on both sides of the foreign policy establishment in Washington. I served in a Republican administration, in the Bush administration, but I think both Republicans and liberals are at fault. You have the Obama approach, which is basically do nothing. It's lead from behind, as one of their nameless aides famously called their approach to foreign policy. And then on the other hand, you have an approach that's also unpalatable to the American public, which is John McCain no-fly zone, which is sort of a half-clever way of saying let's go to war without an exit strategy. And there's a lot you can do in the middle to influence things on the ground to help those who want to fight for their own freedom do so, but we're just not doing it. So not only are they not making the right choices here, they don't even really seem to be able to put options out there. And I think the reason, as you're getting at, is because they really, at the end of the day, don't want to do a whole lot on Syria.
Hey, Christian, Buck Sexton, I wanted to ask you, from Assad's perspective, has he crossed the Rubicon as a war criminal at this point, meaning that it doesn't matter, there is no peace plan, that Assad staying in any capacity now is completely beyond the pale, and therefore it might push him to view this as in it to win it no matter what the cost? Do you think that's the box that he's found himself in or put himself in now?
I think so, and that's an important distinction for people in this town in Washington who say, well, gee, if we could just get Russia in a better position, then we could do more at the UN and we could do more with Assad. Assad, what happened in Hula and what's happened in recent days, going in, killing unarmed women and children who had no stake. They weren't even really linked directly to the rebels. And once you've made that distinction, you don't care what people in New York, people at the UN, what Kofi Annan thinks about you. You don't really even care what Moscow thinks about you. You have determined to do whatever it takes to stay in power, and you don't really care if you're indicted by The Hague or some other international body. So, yeah, I think he's waged the most ruthless kind of war, stuff we really, you see with killing fields in Cambodia or Stalin or the Third Reich. It's gruesome stuff. So if this isn't a war crime, I don't know what is. But I'm not sure that distinction is really going to move Assad or change his behaviors.
So, Christian, you mentioned that there are some things in the middle that we could be doing, so it's not on the one side this unannounced war that John McCain is advocating or the do-nothing position, it seems, of the Obama administration. What are some of those options?
All right, well, I think, stepping back, our foreign policy really ought to be on advancing U.S. interests, and that may sound simplistic, but in Syria we have some U.S. interests, but I don't know if they're completely vital to compel us to go to war. This is a regime that's very close to the Iranian regime, responsible for a lot of deaths of American soldiers in Iraq because they helped foreign fighters get in, supplied them. But still, this is not a government that's gone to war with us. So I think there's justification to help their enemies, but not necessarily justification to go to war, have another commitment, especially as we're facing growing threats from China. We still have an ongoing and threat we haven't handled yet from Islamists globally, from Iran. So arming the rebels and also framing our mind toward an outcome in Syria that benefits U.S. interests. Dropping bombs on them. If we have to bomb people, I'm fine with doing that if it's necessary. But realize if we just did that without trying to bias things toward one group of the rebels or another, you may end up empowering the worst of the rebels, the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood. They tend to be the most ruthless and best organized. So if you arm the rebels and also bias the supplies towards the better among the groups, then you're more likely to get an outcome that's better for the U.S. in the long run.
But really quick, Christian, to follow up on the arming the rebels plan, I've read, for example, that the Russian Navy is patrolling the Lebanese coastline and stopping shipments of arms to those rebels. The rebels, they number 30,000, according to one Syrian official who has actually, gone to the other side, telling Haaretz newspaper. 30,000 on the Oppo side, 70,000 on the Assad side. So given those two challenges, how easy is it to just arm the rebels and hope they overcome Assad?
Well, this is an interesting thing because it would actually require the president to do real diplomacy. And for a president who is elected on magically changing our diplomatic disposition towards friends in Europe and abroad, he really hasn't done a lot in this critical region. The two governments that are most important from our point of view are Turkey and Jordan. They're in the neighborhood. Turkey at times has been unhelpful on developments in the Middle East, but with Assad, they are doing fairly good things. The Turkish leader Erdogan taking a fairly strong role. So working with them, they have better intelligence, they have the access, and they can be the supply conduit. But it means actually rolling up our sleeves and doing real diplomacy as opposed to just preening in New York.
I wanted to say, following up on what Amy said, you and Christian started your discussion talking about whether or not the Obama administration's inaction is because of a lack of caring, essentially. And what I wonder is there a ready and easy action to take? If all other factors were taken out of play and we could put some action into play, what can we do? What can the Obama administration do? They arm the rebels? That doesn't sound like something that's just turnkey. I mean, what action is actually doable? And isn't that question perhaps why they haven't done it? Because there's not a ready answer for that.
Well, I didn't suggest that we don't care. I suggest our inaction suggests that we don't care. So why don't we just come out and say, we're not going to do anything on this? I'm not going to get into the hearts and minds of what the Obama administration and the various players in there think about Syria. I'm sure everyone's very upset. And I believe that the disappointment and the shock and the horror on behalf of Kofi Annan and President Obama is real. But why we're feigning as if we are watching this situation and we are taking note of what you're doing over there. I mean, this is just ludicrous. And if we actually do care and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and our military might, then now is the time. What are we waiting for? So we went in to Libya with fewer deaths. And it was a messier situation. I mean, this is a messy situation. But we had less to gain in Libya. We have so much more to gain in Syria.
You don't like Obama's posturing on this, then. So you've actually come around to say now that you think that either make the case for staying out or make the case for involvement. Don't do what Obama's doing, which is pretend to care. Is that a fair?
Exactly. And to suggest that somehow allowing the UN to parade around in this charade of action gives us cover, as if somehow we are doing something. We are not. We're doing nothing that I know of.
Well, I guess the question, though, then is what should be done, and a concern I know
And what
I
is
have,
doable.
sure, and I talked with a top Middle East diplomat this weekend about it, is that if we were to arm the rebels, for example, and escalate this militarily, unlike Gaddafi, Assad does have friends in the region. He could activate Hezbollah in Lebanon. He could activate...
Let's not forget, we have friends in the region,
and turn
too.
it into
We have
a
friends in Turkey
regional
and Jordan, and as Christian has pointed out, we have not, I think, exercised real diplomacy with our friends in Turkey and Jordan as well.
I would throw this. Christian, what do you think about the parallel to what happened in Iraq with Shia turning on Sunni? I would think that even if we were to arm the rebels in Syria, and they were eventually successful, it would take time by all accounts, they were successful in getting rid of the Alawite regime in Syria, there could be reprisals, there could be violence, I think there would be. Do you think that that's the most likely scenario?
It's certainly something you'd have to be prepared for, and you know, it's likely. I don't know if it's certain. Excuse me. I'm not certain it's even likely. If you look at what happened in Egypt, though, you know, a lot of potential there for score settling that hasn't happened. And even in Libya, different situation than Iraq, but you have you know, more than a dozen different tribes in Libya, and certainly a lot of reprisals you'd think that were in store. And there has been certainly no shortage of turbulence post-revolution there, but not any sort of massacres or true you know, score settling like you saw in Iraq. So again, you can also, if in who you arm and who you liaise with and who you can help navigate into a more senior position within the rebels, you can try and bias things. But you know, I think you nonetheless have to be prepared for violence. The thing is, there's already a level of violence. It's just the question of whether we want to give the victims in this a fighting chance.
All right, Christian, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your insights. A little later in the program, we'll take a look at President Obama's kill list. But after the break, tonight's top 3 stories. Stay with us.
Hi, everyone. This is Amelia from FreedomWorks, here to invite you to a very special event. FreePAC is a national gathering of Americans interested in restoring freedom. This year's event will feature speeches from Glenn Beck, Dick Armey, Matt Kibbe, and many of the biggest names in the freedom movement. So go to freepac.com today to pre-register and help restore liberty in your community and across the nation.
Do you have an idea for an invention or new product? Bill Schaefer, co-inventor of the Splash Wash, did. He came up with the idea while watching his children play. InventHelp submitted his idea to Whammo, maker of toys like the Frisbee and Hula Hoop. To find out how InventHelp can help you try to submit your idea to companies, call for free information. Bill Schaefer made a financial gain with his invention. Bill's experience is not typical, and most inventions are not successful.
For your free inventor's information, call 1-800-253-8086.
Okay, so has anybody actually started saving for college yet?
Oh, not me. No, you got time.
Oh, no, we actually started.
You have?
Really?
Sure.
We figure you start saving a little now, or you'll borrow a lot later on.
Yeah, but how did you even know where to start?
Oh, I found out about the Gerber Life College Plan.
Call now for free information on the Gerber Life College Plan. It's easy.
It's pretty much worry-free.
Well, how could it be worry-free? What if something happens with the stock market?
No matter what happens, we get guaranteed safe growth. So when she's ready for college, the money will be there.
And it doesn't take a lot of money to get started. For as little as $10 a week, you can start saving for college and get guaranteed growth. Just call now.
Oh, it's a life insurance policy, too.
Oh, that's different.
And if she decides not to go to college, there's no penalty, so she can use the money for anything.
We've got to get started.
Yes, we do, because you're going to college.
Call 1-800-892-3073 for your free information. That's 1-800-892-3073.
The sad reality of news is that too often it's not good news. Well, today is no exception, with lots of serious and important stories in the mix. But which ones were important to you? Let's ask the editor-in-chief of The Blaze, who's here with tonight's top 3 stories. Hey, Scott.
On Sharpie, I couldn't figure out why, and then I realized
The Glenn Beck email has gone out, and this story is in the Glenn Beck email, not only the Blaze email. And it's about Obama and his kill list, the New York Times report that looks at how Obama himself personally approves the names that are on the kill list. Very interesting, especially when you compare it to some of Obama's past statements about the ethics and efficiency of those things. Number 2 story right now, you may have all remember the story we did on Friday about Brett Kimberlin, the so-called Speedway bomber, the guy that was the terrorist back in the 70s and who's been terrorizing conservative bloggers. Well, one of those bloggers was in court with Kimberlin today in Maryland. The judge had the conservative blogger arrested, apparently. Some reports in handcuffs. We've confirmed that the arrest happened. We've sorted out a lot of that. That's a story you'll definitely want to check on the Blaze. Number 1 story on the site right now, our continuing examination of Louis Farrakhan and his statements, and we have more to come on this one, by the way. One just went up. This one also linked on the Drudge Report right now. The headline, Farrakhan laments, sad that Mexico lost California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico through American trickery. Soon whites will be the minority in the country they took. You'll look at that story, plus the 2 additional Farrakhan posts that we did today. A lot to cover there. My story to boost is one, since we had the long weekend, that you might have missed as we posted the other day. Was about the left-wing radical Lisa Fithian, and you've heard us refer to her before. She trains people to work in the Occupy movement. What I think you'll really enjoy in the videos, that she's scary, by the way, but in the videos here, is how she teaches the Occupy people to use the energy in their bodies. Quote, we all have a certain amount of energy around our bodies. We can use that energy to disappear. We can use that energy for figuring out what's near you or where to move away. Yeah,
I think in Dr. Strangelove that was called Vital Essences.
Exactly. It is the Vital Essences, Amy.
Well, thanks, Scott. We appreciate it. We'll examine the president's kill list next. Stick around.
Listen up, America!
The price of life insurance has gone down 60% over the last 15 years. Many Americans know they need it, and some that have life insurance know they don't have enough. How would your family get by without you? How are you planning for the uncertainties of life? Guarantee your family $200,000, $400,000, $500,000, $750,000 or more with a term life insurance policy that costs up to 3 times less than other competitors. For example, a healthy 40-year-old man can get a $250,000 term life insurance policy for $16 a month. Don't spend more than you have to on term life insurance. Find out how easy it is to protect the ones you love. The quote is free and there are no obligations. Listen up, America. Call now.
Call 800-488-5317. That's 800-488-5317.
Attention those on Medicare with diabetes. You may be eligible for an upgraded meter.
If you're tired of stabbing your fingertips to test your blood glucose, we have news that could change your life. If you're on Medicare with diabetes, then you need to know there's an alternative method for checking your blood glucose every day. You don't need to stab your fingertips anymore. The Embrace meter from Diabetes Care Club is easier to use and nearly painless. And the best news is that Diabetes Care Club would love to send you one of these meters. This method hurts less, and because you can see and hear your results, it may be easier to understand.
Your blood glucose reading is 89.
Call now to find out why. Nearly 250,000 patients have joined Diabetes Care Club. Membership is free, so is the call.
Call 1-800-213-7027.
Talk to Diabetes Care Club. You'll be glad you did.
Another high-ranking member of al-Qaeda was killed during a drone strike over the weekend. The use of drones as a tactic to take out high-level targets has spiked under President Obama. That much we knew. What may come as a surprise, however, is the fact that the president personally decides who makes the, quote, kill list. For the details on all of this, we turn now to Buck Sexton. Buck, fill us in on Sunday's strike.
Well, it's long been known that to be the number 2 guy in al-Qaeda anywhere is the most dangerous job you could possibly have. The number 2 guy seems to get whacked with some regularity. And this guy named al-Taifi went down. He had been involved in planning attacks against the U.S. in Afghanistan, as senior al-Qaeda planner, apparently moving back and forth between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But this is just the latest in what's known as sort of the drone program. And we've also seen over the weekend, the New York Times put together a report that looks at this program from the perspective of how are decisions made, who gets on this alleged kill list. And I have to say alleged because I don't know for certain about it. And also there's still some questions as to what you can discuss when it comes to this program. But Will, would you give me a quick summary of the New York Times article?
Yeah, according to the New York Times, President Obama's advisors and members from the Pentagon present him with a list of high-ranking al-Qaeda officials who are actually presented on baseball cards that are laid out before him. And President Obama examines these baseball cards, which have pictures of the targets, and he gives a final kill or stay alive to each one of these members.
So this is where this brings us. Now, the Times lays out this piece, I think, in order to actually make the administration look good, look strong on counterterrorism, make them look very deliberative, a word that is has been constantly used to describe Barack Obama by much of the press. But they also said, look, he's acting as essentially the White House in some capacity. He's acting as judge, jury, and executioner here. There's also I wouldn't say it's an accusation, but the subtle insinuation of the fact that this means that instead of a detainee policy, we have a no detainees because there's nobody to detain because people are being eliminated from the battlefield as opposed to captured on the battlefield. So this raises a whole host of issues, and I wanted to throw out the ones that jump out at me for all of you guys. First off, are we comfortable with the executive branch? Again, assuming all this is true. Are we comfortable with the executive branch making decisions about life and death, essentially in secret, on the battlefield abroad, and especially because, as we know, this could include, according to Attorney General Eric Holder, U.S. citizens. Are we comfortable with that process? That's one part of this. Another part of this is, do we think that the drone campaign in whatever countries it's operating in is in fact effective? Or is this really a scalpel when what you need is a sledgehammer? Meaning, you actually want to change events on the ground in some of these countries. You are fighting a counterinsurgency, and that just eliminating leadership, in this case, for example, the number 2 in al-Qaeda, just eliminating leadership is a tool that we can become over-reliant on and actually may backfire over the long term because you become used to having very low output, very low risks involved in drone strikes, and you hope that by doing these things you are going to defeat our al-Qaeda enemies around the world. I should caveat all this by saying that it has been a very successful program in light of the fact that it has eliminated large numbers of senior al-Qaeda figures. That is without question. And the administration rightly touts that. If you want dead al-Qaeda guys, this is, as Leon Panetta has described it, the only game in town. This is the way to get it done. But there's still all the issues of, does that mean that you're winning the war on terror? And then just the other thing, I guess, that I want to put out to you guys is that there's clearly this double standard at work when it comes to this administration and civil liberties, discussion, transparency. This program, which Barack Obama has specifically talked about drones, his advisor Brennan has talked about drones, there's still a sense of, well, is the public allowed to be involved in this debate in a meaningful way? And I'll give you this. Brennan has said recently at a conference, Brennan being Obama's counterterrorism czar, if you will, he said, as a matter of international law, the United States is in armed conflict with al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces in response to the 9/11 attacks. We may use force consistent with our inherent right of self-defense. In that same speech, he went on to say, our advisors are very mindful that as the first nation to regularly conduct strikes using remotely piloted aircraft, we are establishing precedents that other nations may follow, i.e. Russia, China, countries that are going to get this technology and decide that they have enemies abroad that they may wish to deal with. And then he said, for many people in our government across the country, the issue of targeted strikes raises profound moral questions and forces us to confront deeply held personal beliefs and values as a nation. So on the one hand, it seems the White House is completely certain that everything going on with this program that may or may not exist is fine. And on the other hand, they're suggesting that this goes to the very core of our democracy, of what it means to sort of be engaged in national defense. And I just think that we're starting to see the beginning of an honest discussion, and a more open discussion on this issue. And I'll just end with Mike Hayden before I throw it to you guys. He said, democracies do not make war on the basis of legal memos locked in a DOJ safe. I've always thought Mike Hayden was great, and I got to tell you, I think I agree with him there.
Well, let me be the first to say, maybe the only to say at this table, I don't know. I am completely okay with the targeted killing of terrorists. And had this been President Bush, there would have been far more outrage, but I still would have been okay with it. I'm okay with it that it's happening under the Obama administration, and frankly, that he's getting kudos for killing a lot of al-Qaeda people. I'm okay with that. But there's a lot, that article was 10 pages long, and 70,000 words, it felt like. There was a lot in there that I think should concern a lot of people. And mostly it goes to the honesty of this administration, the transparency of this administration. And one of those things is the fudging of the numbers on civilian casualties. And this was a lawyerly trick that Obama initiated here to widen the parameters of what are considered civilian casualties in a combatant zone. And Buck, you don't have to talk about that, but that concerns me when you're looking at an administration and saying, wow, congrats on all the al-Qaeda dead people. What about your civilian casualties? Oh, very low, the lowest of any administration. That may or may not be true. That's one. And then the second concern I have is the fact that he, at least according to this New York Times article, again, in a lawyerly maneuver, got around the whole messy issue of having to deal with detention, which didn't work out so well when he wanted to close Gitmo, by, as you noted, sort of just saying, well, let's just kill him. Then we don't have to detain him. If that's true, too, I would still like to know a little bit more about the kind of conversations that were had, because a lot was made over the decision to close Gitmo and the sort of difference in character between a John McCain and a Barack Obama and a George Bush and a Dick Cheney. And I'd kind of like that for my own psyche cleared up a little and some sunlight on these issues.
So you're not the only person at the table
who
feels that way, and I'm going to try to address those three issues. And I'm actually excited to hear what your point of view is on this as well. But regarding the targeted strike and President Obama's personal role in the basically thumbs up or thumbs down on these terrorists, I don't have a problem with it. In fact, I think I respect it. He has, according to this article, some sense of Thomas Aquinas' moral responsibility. If I am the one to make the call, I should be the one to shoulder the actual emotional elements of saying who lives and who dies. And I think I respect that.
You don't think it's poetic license by the New York Times there?
That I can't speak to.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, may or may not be real.
May or may not be real.
Moving on just a little bit to the efficacy of the drone program, which Buck has written about, we've talked about on this program. Is it a strategy that we can put all of our cards behind, behind this program? Well, it depends on who our enemy is, right? If the enemy is al-Qaeda, it seems like a pretty good tactic to take out the leadership. But al-Qaeda is not monolithic. And as we read more and more about what al-Qaeda's basically flagship enterprise is these days, al-Qaeda of Yemen, they seem very different than what we traditionally understand as al-Qaeda. They want to actually take and hold land. They want to take and hold cities. They want to oust the Yemen president. This is not an organization where you would think you can take out leadership and you're getting your goals accomplished. This is an actual, almost army style of enemy. And will the drone program work? You layer on top of that the precedent problem, which we have talked about, and I have real questions about the precedent problem with the drone program, and this leads to many questions about the drone program in general.
Both of you have opened up very worthy questions about the efficacy of all of this, and your sentiment about the fact that Islamists are now essentially playing for nation states.
Right.
There's of course always the threat of international terrorist attacks, but there is the possibility of Muslim Brotherhood regimes taking control of actually more than one state in the near future. Then we may find that the policies that we have engaged in, which, as you point out, may be angering populations considerably, whether it's just or unjust, we just have to deal with the reality. If 90% of a country hates you, that's something you have to deal with. In the case of, let's say, a country. But just throw that out there. No, but quite seriously, I think that is where we have to start looking at this issue more in depth, because if the idea is that you're going to be able to continue to wage these wars with such a low chance of U.S. casualties and become involved without really having to weigh that cost on the U.S. side, I worry that you just lull yourself into thinking that this is going to get it done.
Well, and let's look at what we're talking in terms of Obama escalating the drone strike strategy or tactic, actually. Under George Bush, you see up on your screen in Pakistan in 2004, there was one drone strike, 2005, one. It escalates, it appears sort of alongside of the surge in Afghanistan up to 35 in 2008. Under Obama, skyrockets, 53 to a high of 117 drone strikes in 1 year. We see a similar escalation in Yemen, not so much in Somalia. So, Matt Kibbe, looking at this, and the New York Times saying that President Obama, he believes that as president of the United States, he has a moral responsibility. I understand that in terms of policy, but doesn't the policy only work if we know this is happening and therefore can hold him responsible?
Well, I'm going to let my inner Ron Paul sneak out here and play because I'm really creeped out by the idea of one guy being judge, jury, and executioner. I'm thinking of Game of Thrones here, where some potentate makes that decision. I think surgical strikes of mass murderers, all for that. The question is, how do you do it and ensure that there is some process that's always followed by which the evidence is heard and somebody objective hears that. I don't think that's the president's job. I really don't. And I don't want him to have that job, not just because I don't want to end up on the kill list either.
There's also the precedent has clearly been set for other countries to do as they wish when they have this technology and then say, we didn't do anything. What are you talking about? There's no program, and in fact, if there was a program, we're dealing with legitimate national security threats. The idea that that's not going to happen, I think, is fanciful.
But what about the argument that President Obama might make, or the New York Times might make for him? I noticed that they didn't use the phrase extrajudicial killing in the piece, nor did they refer to President Obama's Nobel Peace Prize. However, his idea that if he takes responsibility as president, apart from sort of national security apparatus, then he personally may resign if it goes badly, may be impeached if it goes badly, or not reelected. But if he doesn't make it public, then how can any of those things happen?
Well, yeah, I don't think any of the things ever, under any circumstances, honestly would happen. And look, all of this are sort of the collateral costs, if you will, of a program that, as we discussed, and I mean, Essie and Will are both right on this. This has been very useful for what it is. The question is now, as it continues, as we're in a war that seems to go on without end, and as we have an executive branch that asserts war powers in a war without end, it's time to start looking at these issues more honestly and say, wait a second, maybe we thought there would always be an end to these things, and if there's not going to be an end, we need to rethink what the business of all this is.
Did it trouble you to read that David Axelrod was also brought into these meetings?
No comment.
All right, no comment. Well, up next, the Island of Misfit Stories, where we'll have lots of comments, is up after the break.
Coming this year from Mercury Inc., President Obama calls his childhood mentor Frank, but he was so much more. A writer, an entrepreneur, an activist, and a full-fledged communist. Author Paul Kanger reveals the untold story of the communist who changed America forever. Then, a publishing first, a 10-part ebook thriller series released over the course of 1 year. From New York Times bestselling author Chris Stewart. By June, the battle will be raging, not for the Oval Office, but for our souls. It's time to find a new way forward. The Ultimate Voter's Guide from Glenn Beck. In the fall, return to entertainment with 2 groundbreaking sequels. First, the young adult thriller Michael Vey, Rise of the Elgin. And then, the long-awaited sequel to Glenn's smash hit novel, The Overton Window, finally arrives. It's a year of education, entertainment, enlightenment, and of course, the election. All coming this year from Glenn Beck and Mercury Inc.
Before you hit the polls, see what makes candidate Glenn Beck unelectable.
If you find oil on Mount Rushmore, I will be the first to gladly drill through Teddy Roosevelt's head.
Glenn Beck and the BS of A take the stage for a brand new live comedy tour.
$2 for how much gas?
We haven't established that yet. Those are details that you work out after you are elected.
It's unelectable too.
If I may just say, my opponent is a moron.
Because you might as well laugh before you cry. Visit GlennBeckTours.com for details.
It started with restoring honor.
I have a new dream.
Then, restoring courage.
That spirit lives within each and every one of us.
Now, it's time to restore love. Dallas, Texas, July 28th.
No idea what you're talking about.
It seems that the people in Egypt are excited about their presidential election choices, but not in the traditional sense. That tops tonight's Island of Misfit Stories. Will, you're up next.
Right, your definition of excited there. That's key in your setup. It seems, the other night we were all sitting at this table talking about how the elections in Egypt had come down to two candidates, the Muslim Brotherhood candidate and Ahmed Shafiq, who was Hosni Mubarak's last prime minister. And I asked casually during a break to Buck and our other guest, is there any sentiment out there that Shafiq could be like a puppet for the West, that he was under Mubarak? And no one answered me, but it seemed to be something of interest. That being said, apparently the people of Egypt might be wondering the same thing. So after the runoff has been set, 2,000 protesters took to the streets, started a fire and vandalized and broke into Shafiq's campaign headquarters. And they are very, very upset, it appears, that their Muslim Brotherhood candidate, Mohammed Morsi, is in a runoff with a guy who is seen as an extension of the previous dictator.
What do you know? Beck GBTV, what do you know?
I got the non-news news. It looks like Mitt Romney might win the Republican nomination for president. He'll get those delegates most likely in Texas tonight. This is not news. I think that the two things we need to focus on here. One is I think this is the last time that either the Republican or the Democratic establishment gets to choose the candidate from the top down, provided that the UN doesn't take over the internet, of course. But this is the end of an old paradigm where money and name ID and who you know in Washington decides. The new era is going to be very bottom up. It's going to be boisterous. It's going to be interesting. The second thing is I hope Mitt Romney's up for this. I think he's a potentially weak candidate who wants to coast his way to victory running against Obama's performance. And that should be an advantage given the sad state of the economy. But I think he needs to defend himself on Bain, and he needs to start talking about what he believes in if he's going to win this presidency.
All right, SC Cup.
Well, news alert. This presidential election is going to be really expensive, and both candidates are going to spend a lot of money. With the advent of super PACs, it's going to be untold numbers. Obama and Democratic groups supporting him have raised nearly $450 million so far and have $150 million more in the bank. Romney's up there, too. Both candidates are shooting to raise around $800 million, which would put their combined campaign spending at roughly $1.6 billion, which I just discovered is the collective GDP of Bulgaria and the Dominican Republic combined.
McCain Feingold got money out of politics.
Amazing,
no
amazing.
money in politics, anyway.
All right, Buck.
You
said your story makes you sad.
No, it made like a sad in a good way. Well, anyway.
He's getting choked up.
So this is one of these stories. You know, sometimes in Afghanistan, our soldiers bond with dogs. Oftentimes, they're dogs that they are sent to work with. You know, bomb-sniffing dogs. Well, in this case, it was really happenstance. A staff sergeant, U.S. Army staff sergeant named Nick B. first met Bodhi, an Afghan herding dog, while on patrol in Afghanistan. There he is. They were just reunited, guys. But look, when he met this dog, it had its ears cut off. It was severely malnourished. It had been abused. He said you could tell it just hadn't been fed properly. When I saw that, it broke my heart. And so he decided he was going to get this dog out of there. So he bartered with cigarettes to get custody of the dog from the Afghans who kind of had it, I suppose. And he said that they bonded over beef jerky. The pup soon became a part of his unit. It was sort of like the mascot. It was a friendship-building process for a few minutes, and then he realized I was a good guy. I was going to save him. He wouldn't leave my side. Anyway, he made arrangements to bring the new puppy home through an organization called Puppy Rescue Mission, and he made it back just today. And it was very...
Oh, that is a very heartwarming story.
Yeah, anyway, dogs, soldiers, two of my favorite things. So.
All right. Well, in the animal story category, mine's very quick. Over the weekend, a bear, well, I guess in California, was feeling like he needed to cool off. We've got a little video. Him jumping in somebody's swimming pool. Do you have that up? There we are. He's in an infinity pool in California, in Monrovia. The two women who saw this, of course, were absolutely shocked to see their bear in their swimming pool. But I think given SC what we know about the weather down there, he's likely to come back.
It was a nice-looking pool.
It was.
I'd go back.
He's got some expensive taste, that bear.
Well, that's all the time we have. Our thanks for Matt Kibbe, president of Freedom Works, for hanging out with us tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow for more Real News. Good night, everybody.